Hello everyone, my name is Cuong Than. I'm a fourth-year PhD student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Today I present my paper about towards instant optimal Euclidean spanner. This is a joint work with Hung Lee, Shay Solomon, Csaba Tóth, and Tianyi Zhang. In my presentation today, I will first give introduction and some basic definition of the spanner and Euclidean spanner. In the second part, I will give you a construction of an instant optimal spanner with optimal sparsity, and the second part is with optimal lightness. Then I will briefly discuss our other contribution of the paper, and the last part is a conclusion and some open questions. Okay, let's move to the first part. A spanner of a graph G is a subgraph, a dust graph, that preserves the distance between any two vertices up to a parameter t. So in this picture, this is a graph G, and the right picture is a two-spanner of G. The definition of a spanner still work with the weighted graph, and in this case, every edge has weight 1. Now we move to Euclidean spanner. A T-spanner of a set of point x in Euclidean space is a T-spanner of the complete graph, with the vertex set being the set x, and the weight of each edge is the weight in the Euclidean space. In this picture, x is a set of 6 points, and the right picture is a 1.5 spanner of x. So the most popular question when constructing a Euclidean spanner is, given a set of point x and a parameter epsilon, is there any polynomial time algorithm that can find a 1 plus epsilon spanner of x with minimum number of edges or with minimum total weight? However, this problem is NP hard. So instead of finding the one with minimum number of edges, we find the spanner with approximate minimum number of edges or approximate minimum total weight. Here in approximate, we mean the approximation ratio is an absolute constant that only depends on d and does not depend on epsilon. There are two benchmarks to measure how compact a spanner is. So the first is the sparsity. The sparsity of a spanner H is the normalized of the number of edges in H. Formally is the number of edges in H minus n over n minus 1. In the early 90s, the 1 plus epsilon greedy spanner is a very simple and powerful construction, has been proven to achieve sparsity epsilon to the 1 minus d, and this later have been proven to be optimal by Lee and Solomon. Here in optimal, we mean existentially optimal, and the definition of existentially optimal will be given in later. The second benchmark is the lightness of a spanner. The lightness of the spanner is the total weight of every edges in the spanner over the weight of the minimum spanning tree. In the same paper, Lee and Solomon has proven that the 1 plus epsilon greedy spanner also achieved the lightness epsilon to the minus d times log 1 over epsilon. And they also show that the optimal value is epsilon to the minus d. So this is the construction of the greedy spanner. So for each pair of vertices UV, we check whether the distance in the spanner is more than t times the distance in the matrix space. If that is, then we add the edge UV to H. So greedy spanner is perhaps the most simple and well-studied spanner. Then we move to the definition of existentially optimal. So informally, a spanner algorithm is existentially optimal if it is optimal for the hard disk instant. So here in optimal, we mean up to a constant that does not depend on epsilon. The second definition is about instant optimal. So, and the algorithm A is instant optimal if it produces an optimal output for every input. So due to our definition of optimal, A can be viewed as an approximation algorithm for the 1 plus epsilon spanner problem. Instant optimal is different from existentially optimal. So existentially optimal only guarantee the algorithm A is optimal for one instant per size. And the instant optimal algorithm is optimal for every instant. So Shay and Solomon has proven that the 1 plus epsilon greedy is existentially optimal with respect to sparsity and lightness. So this makes the greedy spanner become a very strong candidate for the instant optimal problem. However, in our paper, we prove that greedy is not instant optimal. And more surprisingly, this is still true if we consider the 1 plus x epsilon greedy, with x is a parameter. So the main contribution of our paper is we given a polynomial time by criteria algorithm finding a 1 plus f epsilon spanner H of a set of points that is optimal in both sparsity and lightness. Here E spar is the sparsest 1 plus epsilon spanner of X, and E light is the lightest 1 plus epsilon spanner of X. The parameter F is a very slowly grow parameter on epsilon and D. The main tool we use in our algorithm is a pruning algorithms. So given a spanner of given a 1 plus delta spanner H of X, and the ratio between the number of edges in H is less than alpha times the optimal, then we have a polynomial time pruning algorithm that return a spanner with slightly increase in the stretch, and the number of edges is less than log alpha times the optimal one. However, in my presentation today, I will give you a slightly weaker construction. Instead of log alpha, I will give a square root alpha version of the algorithms. Okay, now we move to the algorithms. For sparsity, the idea is we iteratively find all the pairs that can replace many edges in H. And here's an example. So the red edges are edges in our spanner H, and a pair UV can replace both red edges. So they are good spanner path from the two ends of the red edges through U and V. Then we add all of those UV to H and then delete the replaced edges. So we delete all the red edges and then we add UV to H. So now a pair UV can replace an edge XY if it satisfies two conditions. The first one is there's a good approximation path from H to Y cross UV. And so meaning that HU plus UV plus VY is less than 1 plus epsilon XY. And the second condition is the length of UV is comparable to the length of XY. To implement our idea, we find every pair UV that can replace square root alpha edges in H. We delete all of those edges and then we add UV to H. So here's an edge XY in H. Here's another edge H prime Y prime, and a pair UV that can replace square root of those. So we add UV to the spanner and then we delete XY and H prime Y prime. This is our pruning algorithms. For each scale of edges with weight 2 to the I minus 1 2 to the I, we find all the pair that can replace more than square root alpha edges in the same scale, and then we delete all of those edges and add UV to H. Our main lemma is let h prime be the output of the pruning algorithm on an input spanner h. Then the number of edges in h prime is less than square root alpha times the number of edges in the optimal 1 plus epsilon spanner of h. Now we move to the proof. For each edge xy in h prime, let P be the spanner path between x and y in the optimal spanner. And we're going to charge xy to some edges in P. The first case is there's a long edge uv in P. In this case, we charge xy to uv and we call xy a type 1 edge. Here in this example, uv is a long edge. Here in long, I mean the length of uv is comparable to the length of xy. The second case is there's no long edge in the optimal path from x to y. In this case, we charge xy to the almost parallel edges to xy in P. Each edge uv will receive a charge proportional to its length. We call this xy type 2 edge. In this picture, the red edge xy and the blue path is the optimal path. There's no long edge in the blue path that is large enough, so we charge xy to the green edge here. They are all almost parallel to xy, and the total length of the blue path has been proven to be proportional to the length of xy. And this part we depend heavily on Euclidean space. In a single scale, an edge uv can only be charged to less than square root alpha type 1 edges. Otherwise, we can prune more. This is due to our algorithms. We're going to prove that an edge uv can only be charged to less than square root alpha type 2 edges. Here in this example, there are two type 2 edges, xy and x prime, y prime. Assuming both of them charged to the same green edge in this picture, and we can show that there's a dark green edge that has length proportional to xy and x prime, y prime. This dark green edge can replace both xy and x prime, y prime. So if an edge uv can charge to more than square root alpha type 2 edges, then there's a dark green edge that can replace more than square root alpha type 2 edges, and this contradicts to our algorithms. Now for single edge uv, the total charge of type 1 edge to uv is less than square root alpha. This is due to the fact that for a single scale, there are only square root alpha edges charged to uv. For type 2 edges, the total charge is bounded by a geometric series. This is due to the fact that the charge to uv decreases by the length of edge in the single scale. And the sum of this geometric series is also bounded by square root alpha. If we iterate this algorithm log epsilon to the minus d time, we get a 1 plus 2 to the log epsilon to the minus d time epsilon spanner with optimal number of edges to achieve log star loops, and this will lead to a 1 plus 2 to the log star epsilon to the minus d time epsilon spanner. This requires an additional idea. We refer to our paper for full algorithms. Then I will briefly discuss about how to construct a spanner with optimal lightness. The idea of this one is, for type 1 edges, you don't have to do anything. We already have those in sparsity. The length of the type 1 edge is comparable to the length of the edge you charge to. For type 2 edges, we need the geometric decay argument for the sparsity break, and this is a significant challenge. So for each type 2 edge, we add a helper edge, and then we run greedies for each scale to prevent further charge. So for example, assuming xy is a type 2 edge, and we add a helper edge which is roughly in the middle of xy and has length proportional to xy. So if xy is charged to many green edges, and those green edges are heavily charged in the lower level, then they have their own hyper edge. And these hyper edges together form a good spanner path from x to y. So xy will never be added to h prime. Other contributions of our paper include: first, we have discussed that the greedy spanner is not instant optimal with either sparsity or lightness. And this is also true even when we compare greedy with straight 1 plus h epsilon to the optimal 1 plus epsilon spanner. We also give a fast construction of our algorithms. The time complexity is n times epsilon to the minus d times a point log. For conclusion, in this paper, we have proven that a spanner with optimal up to an absolute constant factor, sparsity and lightness is computable in point time with a very small slack on the stretch, and there's almost no dependence on the dimension in the slack. For the open question, the first question is, can you find an instant optimal spanner without increasing the stretch in point time, even with respect to sparsity only? The second question is, can you compute an instant optimal spanner for other matrix spaces and graphs, for example, for doubling matrix, for planar graph? These are references for our paper, and thank you for your attention.